you
Hi,
doing?
I'm doing so well. How are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Excellent. Well, just first of all, thank you so much for finding the time for us. I know you're very busy, but it means
Oh,
so
no
much that you're
worries.
you're sitting down here. Are you having a good day so far?
Pretty good, pretty good. A lot of paperwork here to fill out, but I'm doing pretty good. And my office mates, which I'm not at the office, but my four-legged office mates may start barking, but it'll be okay. It'll be
It's all
okay.
good. It's all good.
Yeah.
We're here in the library, so there's no telling what'll happen.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
Sweet. Well, just for the record, would you mind stating your full name and today's date for me?
Okay. Yeah, sure. My name is Africa Isabel Kilimanjaro. Today's date is October 11th, 2021.
Beautiful. And that's helpful for me because I can never remember the day of the week or the number day either.
It's
Oh my
okay.
gosh. Well, thank you. Yeah. So I had the privilege to look through your mother's interview earlier
Okay.
with Unsung Heroes, and I saw where
Mhm.
you kind of poked your head in and you could interview, say, oh, you said, well, you can interview me later. So I'm so happy that we were able to.
Oh, yeah, that's no problem. It's no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're pretty familiar with the structure of Unsung Heroes and how things are going to go. Yeah, sweet. So
I
I
hope
just
so.
have a yeah. Well, firstly, I want to take some time to see if you have any questions for me or like anything you're curious about.
No, not off the top. Just ask away, and I'll do my best. I'll do my best to answer, or well, whatever you ask. Yeah.
Of
So,
course.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
beautiful. I just have a couple of questions here, but they're mostly a guideline. I really just want to sit and have a conversation.
Okay.
Just sort of off the top, like Oliver Twist. You tell me a little bit. Yeah. So, are you from the town of Greensboro?
Yes, I grew up here. I was born here in Greensboro, and I grew up here. I am the youngest of my generation of Kilimanjaro crew. I have nieces and nephews, but um, my father he was a professor of English, speech, and theater arts at North Carolina A&T State University. And my mother was a media specialist, focusing on special education at McKeever Education Center with back then it was the Greensboro Public Schools. Today it's the Guilford County Schools. But yeah, so I grew up here. I went to college at A&T. I finished at A&T. I've been all over the place, but because my father taught there, so it was kind of like I list my choices. I had choices, but he was like, no. Yeah, I guess so. Anyway, yeah. When I went to college, I majored in the sciences because I thought, okay, well, I'm going to get as far away from English and journalism and I like the arts, but I said no, I'm going to get as far away from the fields that my parents were in. But you see how that's turned out. I'm now I've been the editor at the Carolina Peacemaker for quite a long time. But as a kid, when growing up in the newspaper business, it's kind of hard to get the ink out of your blood, so to speak. And I didn't intend on, it wasn't my intention of doing this, but I always had some sort of tie, not just familial, but I would spend most of my summers in grade school from perhaps like fourth grade on, probably even earlier than that, were spent at the newspaper office. So I was like, I started out as a cleanup girl. Then they gave me copy to edit. Then they gave me, then it was, why don't you be a cub reporter? I did that for a little bit, but because my schoolwork and because I wanted to focus on something in the sciences, kind of interfered with me really doing that. But in junior high and in high school, I really liked. I had a thing for like magazines and the graphics that you see in magazines, and I like the color. So when USA Today came out and they had color in the newspaper, I was like, why can't we do that? Let's do that. That looks really good. But I did yearbooks. I started in junior high, and I was like the first African American editor in chief of my high school yearbook. So that kind of gave me a feel for it. And there was a gentleman at the office. His name was Cecil Young, and he's no longer with us. With the, he's passed on, but he gave me my first lesson in graphics. He helped me to know how to arrange things spatially, how to back then it was pay stubs. It wasn't all computerized like it is now. So you just hit a button and this has got a border on it. So I learned how to do get the X-Acto blade and all that, and do all that kind of thing. And I that was to me, that was not very stressful. The stressful part of doing newspaper, well, just any kind of media publication where you're telling someone's story, or you're telling the story of an event, is you want to get that right. You want to be as accurate as you can, and you want to talk to the people involved and that sort of thing. My problem, I have a good time talking to people. That's the best part about this job I could think of is and that's the fun part. But when the topic is something that is not necessarily, well, it can be controversial, but something that's like sad or that really impacts people, like, for example, wanting to reopen a landfill in someone's neighborhood that's been closed for a number of years, that type of thing. That kind of stresses me out, because to me, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that really impacts someone's life, or a very large portion of our population's lives. It's very impactful, and it's not only impactful to the people that are living now, but for generations that can have an impact. I mention that because my background, I have an undergraduate degree in professional biology. I have a master's degree in public health and environmental and occupational health. I have I came back to Greensboro. I was a medical student, and so I know a lot about healthcare, but I'm not a physician. I came back to help my parents, and my father was just in the beginnings of developing dementia, and he was very much aware that this was happening. And so the guilt, I had siblings who said, "Oh, you don't want to do that. Don't come back. Don't do that. Don't do that. No." But the guilt that you feel when someone says that he never voiced it before. So when someone as fiercely independent as my father was, and as fiercely opinionated as he was, and as fiercely as he wanted me to be what I was trying to pursue at that time, for him to say, I could really use your help, registered in my head. And so I came to Greensboro. I came back to Greensboro. And this is where I grew up, so I don't really mind it. The funny thing is, as you grow up here and a couple of generations of people, or you see people that you didn't really think of back when you were like 10 or 11 or whatever, and that they were really, you don't think of them as, oh, they're really famous, or they really had an impact on our community, until later on. And it's like, oh yeah, I knew him. He used to come by the house and have, we'd have, soft drinks and, some snacks together, that type of thing. And you don't ever really think of them as being, they were just, people who were either friends or colleagues or folks in the community who wanted to better the lives of people in Greensboro and in Guilford County, even across the state. They had that type of an impact and a pull on this area.
This is a completely tangential aside, but I love the fact that you just called them soft drinks, because that's what my family calls them. We're all from North Carolina too, and you never hear it anymore. Yeah. But well, thank you so much for telling me all that information. And I can't imagine coming back, that the emotions of coming back after your father asked you for help. That was an intensely charitable and incredible action you took.
It took more than once. That was the problem. I thought maybe if he asked once, he would go on to the next person or something. And there really wasn't a next person, because I'm the youngest. And there were, there's other people like when the paper, the Carolina Peacemaker, started in 1967. I was nowhere to be found. I was not around. But over the years, and especially in the beginnings, I have a fleet of cousins who worked there while they were in school, or or during the summers, they come to Greensboro and they would work there. So I have a couple cousins who were at A&T who were, they'd sell advertising, or they would, serve as a manager or something. I've had, UNCG, Elizabeth City, they would just come, and help out. And we've never forgotten that. And I have two sisters and I have a brother. My brother has autism. So he's the oldest, but my two sisters worked at Peacemaker. And when they were kids, they would be out in the snow trying to sell papers. That was it. That was the thing. And some of them, they would say, "I'm never doing this again. This is too much," that sort of thing. So I remember selling, I did everything from selling subscriptions to, doing whatever it took to make it, make it run. It's a family operation. I have a dog in front of me who is whining to get up in a chair. So just pardon this angle that I'm at.
You're fine. Yeah, it's all good.
Cool. Hold on just a second. And then when I get them up. Okay, there we go. I'm back. So, it's it has its challenges, but the main idea of doing a local publication for, and it started, it's primarily for the African American community, and to inform them about issues and things that are happening. And even, everything from, we do sports, arts, entertainment, community news, politics, things that are, that affect us, from the, we have people who write national news to people who write, our local stuff that's going on. Cotillions, which are like debutante balls, that kind of thing. Yeah. That's, whatever's happening, we want to be able to chronicle it, so that people know, that there is a significant African-American population of color here in this area, always has been, basically. We need to, cover that, chronicle that information, that what's happening.
Yeah, well, it's an incredible undertaking, and it seems like you've described your growing up around the Peacemaker and in Greensboro is really seminal for you, formative for your perspectives on a lot of things. And I'm just really curious how growing up in the midst of the Peacemaker, in the midst of Greensboro in this era, how that sort of informed your perspective on the civil rights movement and your family's place in it, and your family's place in Greensboro through the Peacemaker.
Yeah, so I always describe myself as I am the direct beneficiary of what went on before I came along, so I'm the direct beneficiary of what happened during the 1950s, 60s civil rights movement. And my parents were very active in that. It also, those activities also spurred the creation of the Peacemaker in 67. And I've noticed, been quite aware throughout the decades, the issues that keep coming up are very similar to each other. So we thought we had solved voting rights, right, during the 60s with the Voting Rights Act, of Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, 64, 65, that sort of thing. But now we are faced with the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, the sections in there that, and obviously to me, that's still needed, and that gutting should not have occurred, because if we were okay, there would not be a need for, or these, the states, some of the states that comprise our union would not be so bent on establishing laws that inhibit people from being able to cast a ballot, cutting the number of voting precincts across states or in cities and towns and counties, cutting the number of days you can early vote, making it very difficult to even access a voter registration, making it difficult for you to be able to drop off a ballot, or even apply and receive an absentee ballot, those types of things. So with civil rights, I mean, right now, that's probably one of the biggest issues, voting rights right now, going on right now, today, that we thought we had sort of fixed. The problem is that Congress, our Congress, needs to codify the Voting Rights Act, and not just that, but the two bills that are in place that should be passed on that issue, so that it becomes constitutional, and it's not something that can be just changed willy-nilly. You know, one president comes in and says, we're gonna gut this, and I'm gonna stack the courts so that we can get this gutted. You know, that's not what a democracy is supposed to be all about. We can't, you know, if this happens, we're not gonna be able to call ourselves a democracy. That's just, voting is essential to a functioning democracy, to a functional society and government. And so that should be free, fair, and people should have access to it. Mm-hmm. Without someone saying, oh, it's rigged before you ever can cast a ballot. You know, it's just my theory. That's one issue. You got all kinds of issues. You got with COVID having the pandemic, and we're still in the midst of it. There's the issue of health inequities, and we have seen that's been staring our society in the face. It's funny because people have been talking about health equity and the inequities that have gone on for years and years and years and years, decades, and now people are seeing it up close. The inequities that arise, the ability for some people to be able to access. Now people can get a shot now, a vaccine. It's almost offered in every drugstore. People. There are organizations that even have drive-up vaccination places. And we would, in the paper, we would report on those types of places, to go to let the public know, or on our webpage, we would have that information. But I guess the issue is also, if you get sick, can you access, or if you get COVID, can you access the ability to get the monoclonal antibody? Will that be given to you? Who's the gatekeeper on that? Because at the beginning of the pandemic, it was only the president of the United States and maybe the cabinet, that sort of thing, who's able to get it. But is it offered across the board to people? Is it offered to people of color? I'm sure it probably, I'm hoping that it is, but I'm just saying that those are the things that people, that especially people, if you're a person of color, you think about in the back of your mind when you have to go to the hospital. I've had my father, when I would take him to the hospital, if he'd have an issue, it was nothing for him. He would throw his degree basically on the table in order to get them to pay him some attention, so that they know that he's not just some regular guy. And even if he was a regular guy off the street or whatever, they should treat him with respect. And that's the whole idea, is that there is an anxiety within the Black community and with other communities out here, that we are not going to be treated with respect in certain circles, and we keep demanding, and sometimes it gets ignored, or people, it's because you're not the Superior Court judge, or you're not the professor or whatever. There's an anxiety that you feel that people are not going to hear you, and so once again, what I try to do in what I do every day is to bring an awareness, not just to African American people, but to people across the board, that there are issues out here that affect everybody to some degree. And that we have to live in a society, that's everybody, Black, white, yellow, green, purple, I don't care who you are. We have to learn to live together and have a community that can sit down and have a conversation and listen to one another, and not get caught up in the 20-word soundbite, or the 1-minute explanation that's on the evening news. Some things take a little longer to explain, especially when when oppression has been going on for 400 plus years. Some things take a little longer to explain to people. So, and that's the good part about being in print. And even being, having a website, you can take the time to write out something. You can give them, I call it the NPR version of or an explanation of what's happening. Because there's just, you just can't explain certain things in, a minute's span. It just doesn't work. So
Yeah.
next question.
Well, no, I really appreciate that, because I feel like you're sort of touching on how working in print and being in this business with your family has really given you a perspective and an in on the really cyclical nature of a lot of these issues, and how it's almost Sisyphean, where you're pushing the boulder up and you feel like you're doing and making all these actions, and then you're privy to all these actions at all levels of government, federal, state, local, especially here in Guilford County and Greensboro, where you're seeing these same problems and these issues pop up. And I was just curious how that sort of feels to be involved in this paper that is so central to your family and your family's story, from having a perspective through your parents, how it sort of started in the 60s in the wake of these national movements for civil rights, and sort of as a product of that and as a beneficiary of those, and to see it sort of follow it through the latter half of the 20th century, and now being so integrally involved in its production. How does that sort of feel to be a part of that and be a part of that legacy right now?
I think about it, but I don't really think about it, because you can't really think about it when you're in it. You just have to do it, type of thing. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the opportunity, because it's, not everybody gets to hear other people's stories and hear how certain things affect them, or what they're going through, or whether it's a celebration or something positive or something that's not so positive. It's a privilege to even to because a lot of times I will hear news, or I will hear information before anybody else hears it. So by the time it either, some people see it, in the paper, or whether they see it on TV, I've already heard it probably 2 or 3 times before some things break. And that's a privilege, that for to have other folks out in the community trust me, or entrust the paper, the Peacemaker, to tell their story or report on what's happening. It takes a lot of, and you don't want to blow that. You don't want to blow the trust. You want people to trust you, and to know that you will tell their story as they tell it to you. That's important, because I see, especially a lot of big papers will take people's story, and then it's like, well, that's not what I said, So I don't have any shame about if I'm quoting someone, to call them up and say, if I don't have it on tape, which usually I will tape or record an interview so that I get the quote right. But it's nothing for me to say, hey, I just want to make sure I got your quote, what you said, accurate, and that it means this and this. And people are appreciative that you take the time to do that, instead of, because some of us in the journalism world can be kind of, oh, I know what I'm doing. It's that you're working with people. It's all about telling the story. And there's some really good story people who can report and do stories here in Guilford County. Some of them, I see, in print, and some of them are no longer with certain papers, and they work at universities. And those are a lot of those folks are some of my favorite writers out there in this area. And they're they have tremendous talent. But I guess to answer your question, it's really it's a privilege to do what I do. It's also stressful, because in the position that I'm in, I'm not just the editor. I mean, I have to be concerned about advertising. because that's what keeps the newspaper going. I have to be concerned about circulation. I have to talk to other publishers because there's other things going on in the publishing world. And in today's world of newspapers, a lot different from when it was 50 something years ago. It's now that you'll have like your local newspaper here that is owned by a conglomerate that owns 200 plus other newspapers across the country. So it's, even though it's here, it is not, and there are a few people here that work here on that paper, that's okay, but it loses its local feel over time. And unfortunately, there are even smaller towns across this state that have lost their local papers, their local publication. And that's bad because then it's just like a food desert. Now you've got a newspaper desert. You've got an information void, that a void in collecting information. And in the field that you're in, history. This is what this is. We become like a historiography, right? That historians rely on or depend on, to look back during a certain time period to see how things were or see how they were reported in the Peacemaker versus how it's reported in the News and Record versus how it's reported in the Journal in Winston-Salem, or the Wilmington Journal down in Wilmington, or the Carolinian in Raleigh, or so we are the record, or one of the records. The big papers always get they are considered the standard. But as we're entering we're in the digital age. I accept that we're in the digital age. I don't mind digital, but the same principles need to apply. So a lot of folks who think that they are reporting something don't actually go back and fact check what they put out there. They'll put out information that is not accurate, not true. And they don't have there's no accountability for doing that. That's the problem. And that's dangerous. So.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta keep your CQs in line.
Yeah.
But I totally see what you're saying, and I appreciate the aspect of the importance of being sort of the record and sort of whose record is it. And you touched on one of these concepts that I'm really interested in. It's concept of trust that the Peacemaker has in the community. And I'm just curious what you think about sort of how in the early days of the paper, if you remember your parents' memories of, or your own memories of it, just you starting in '67, which you had said was sort of before your time, sort of growing up around that. How do you think the Peacemaker really cultivated that trust as the paper for Greensboro's Black community, Guilford County's Black community?
Well, the paper basically got started because African Americans were not being covered in the daily. If we were being covered, it was because somebody got arrested for something, or it was something negative, and the story was told, and it wasn't really told it wasn't fully vetted as far as getting all sides, and so it painted members of the Black community as not so upstanding, so to speak, or and that's not necessarily the Peacemaker's goal is not to paint people as being upstanding. That's not it. It's to give tell the story and tell it straight. Because before we existed, there was a paper called what was that paper called? It was called The Future Outlook, and it was published here in Greensboro back during like the 30s and 40s and up to probably the mid 60s. And the man who published it, we called him, his last name was Johnson. We called him Future Outlook Johnson. And he would come and he would talk to my father because I think he was up in age and he was going to get out of the newspaper business, and he had heard that my father wanted to start a newspaper, and so they talked. But I mentioned him because one of the things he would say was, if you do good, I'm going to put you in my paper. And if you do bad, I'm going to put you in my paper. And so that's a kind of it's a truth. And it's kind of talks about it as a joke, but it's a lot of jokes are based on fact. And that's a running thing at my office. It's been there, for forever. That, if you do good, if you do something that's positive, well, yeah, we can put that in. But if you do something that's crazy and, that people need to know about, yeah, we're going to write on that too. It doesn't matter who you are, people need to know that you were silly enough to do these things, and it affects, a lot of folks. Mainly politicians get in trouble with this, that type of thing. So yeah, that's what we do. So that's really, it was out of a necessity, founded out of a necessity to tell stories that were pertinent to the African American community, and that not only celebrated the community, but let people know that, hey, this was going on, and you need to be aware, of what's happening here. The paper serves as kind of a cohesion for a community. That way, it's not you're getting bits and pieces of information here and bits and pieces here. It's like this is the house that you come to, to tell we're like the, I don't want to say it's not a canary in the coal mine, but we're the beacon of, hopefully like a beacon of light that can, spread the word, so to speak. So,
yeah, no, for sure. And I really appreciate the fact that it's just like you're sort of saying like, hey, the community didn't have a voice. People weren't, not necessarily didn't have a voice, but people weren't covering what we were doing. And I'm really curious about sort of the political actions and things that were covered by, let's say, the News and Observer, the News and Report, all these other outlets, especially during movements for civil rights, movements for Black justice and activism. Mm-hmm. How are those actions maybe differently covered in the Peacemaker than they were in the News and Report?
Okay.
If you think they were.
Yeah, I remember, well, one example would be a case, there's a big case that happened down in Wilmington that's called the Wilmington 10, where there were 10 people who were arrested and tried and convicted for accused of firebombing a grocery store. And the Peacemaker and the Wilmington Journal and the Carolinian and the Carolina Times in Durham and a bunch of other papers wrote stories about that incident, the trial and the convictions of those individuals. And it was back then, it was considered like a sham type of trial, that they didn't have the right people, that the people who were arrested and convicted were convicted wrongly. And it was proven so 40, I guess, years later, that was the case. And Governor Bev Perdue pardoned, provided rendered a pardon of innocence to all of the members of the Wilmington 10. Now, at that point, maybe probably two or three were probably deceased by that point. But that pardon came about because of primarily a writer who was who still writes for a lot of our papers. His name is Cash Michaels. He and the NAACP, the state NAACP, worked on it, investigating that this particular case. Found documents stored in the basement of the county courthouse. I don't know if it was the New Hanover County Courthouse. Documents that revealed that the prosecutor in the case basically had committed prosecutorial misconduct and also had a bias against the people he was prosecuting, and he was also basically a racist because there was documentation found in those documents that revealed that he sought to place people on the jury, I believe, that had either Klan sentiments or members of the Ku Klux Klan. And he's also sought to prevent African Americans from serving on the juries. So all of those folks were found, were granted pardons of innocence by the governor of the state. And this is after having, they had spent years in jail. They had never, most of them were out at the time, but once you got a felony, you can't, it's very difficult, during the 70s, 80s, and 90s to get a job, or, to go on with your life, because you've got that following you. And so the Black press was instrumental in achieving those pardons of innocence from those folks. Now, the News and Record did stories on that, on those cases back in like the 70s, 80s, but at the time they were not instrumental in the part in the obtaining the innocence part later on in history. So that's one case that comes to mind immediately. But there are others. There are still people sitting in jails right now, even right here in North Carolina, who are innocent of the crimes that they have been convicted of committing, have had DNA evidence to prove their innocence. And there's one gentleman right now, and I can't think of his name, right now that the NAACP, they've been having vigils down in Raleigh, trying to convince the governor, Governor Roy Cooper, to grant this individual a pardon of innocence. He's been in jail decades. He's now out of prison, but our state legislature has gone so far as to limit the monetary awards that are granted to people who have been wrongly convicted and found to have been wrongly convicted. So now the state has capped the amount of awards. I'm hoping that somebody comes along and overturns that, because you cannot give somebody back 20, 30, 40 years of their life. You just can't do it. So these are things that, these are subjects that people that we have reported on and we continue to report on. And the NAACP's legal defense that's local, that's here in this state, and other community leaders and religious leaders have advocated for the release of people like this, who are in the criminal justice system convicted wrongly due to the actions of the powers that control those levers of justice doing, unethical things. So that's just one area that, back in the day, the News and Record wouldn't think of covering. They do now, they have now, but when it's first kicked off, that it was, the idea, oh, Black people are inherently this way, or they are inherently, we know that Black people always, that's not true. But when you have an entity that is a publication or whatever that doesn't necessarily say that outright, but uses that dog whistle type of that's how they convey the message. It's silent, but it's not silent. It's screaming at you. It almost becomes it's a necessity to combat that, because there are still people who there are a lot of people here who've never met, never socialized with people who are not like them, and we got to get away from that. We, Black people and brown people, we may be in the minority in the United States, but we are in the majority as a global community, if you look at it that way. So we have to, we have to embrace, and in this era of internet and all that beautiful stuff, we need to embrace that we are a part of a global community. You may be in a minority down in Asheboro, wherever you want to live, but you are in a global majority of people from all stripes. So, yeah.
No, for sure. And I mean, I really do appreciate sort of the activist role that people in the news industry, in the newspaper industry can play in a corrective sense through investigation. And that's something I'm really curious about here locally in Greensboro, if you don't mind me asking, as we sort of go back and dissect these actions that happened here, some more positive and some more negative. Of course, we have the unimpeachable legacy of the sit-ins, and I understand that your father and mother were both sort of involved in their administration and that activism. But I'm also sort of curious about some that were probably not reported correctly or more veristically by other newspapers, such as like the Greensboro Massacre, and sort of what memories you have of actions like that.
Yeah. You know, I don't know if so I hate being like I don't want to be a Monday quarterback because especially for somebody else's publication. However, you have to, if you put yourself back in 1979, and I was only 9 at the time, maybe when this happened, I might have been going on 10, but November 3rd, 1979, when all that happened, of course, you know, you have, as a journalist, and there were a lot of journalists trying to cover that, I'm sure that they got the story that they got during that time, but I'm not quite sure that they actually, if they talked to Reverend, he wasn't a Reverend then, but Nelson Johnson and the other people who lived through that, you know, Joyce Johnson, if they talk, I'm not sure if they actually sat down and talked to them to get their perspective. Because when it happened, I remember I was at home and my father says, I got to go see Nelson. And I got to go see that. Nelson was in jail at the time. But, you know, he wanted to make sure that Reverend Johnson was okay and that his family was okay and that sort of thing first, before even, you know, writing or reporting, having somebody report on it. And we report on that type of thing. But the nooks and the crannies, or the you know, the devil is in the detail, doesn't really come out until you actually have a full picture of or you hear the side of the folks who were with the Communist Workers' Party. You know that the Klan and the Nazi people representing those groups had guns. You know that the CWP people didn't have any weapons. You know, but what we didn't know at that time, which was found out later, which is how Lewis Pitts, who was an attorney here, won the case against the Klan, which awarded damages to, I think it was Marty Nathan's, her husband, Dr. Nathan's estate. Anyway, and it's kind of a hodgepodge. But what I'm trying to get at is, later on we find out that that there was an FBI informant, you know, involved, who was, you know, giving information, who was active with the Klan and the Nazi organization, who was providing information to the law enforcement offices here in Greensboro. So they basically knew that the Klan was coming to this march, and you know, and then later on we find that police protection was not provided as adequately as it should have been provided, because, or allegedly because the law enforcement knew that these people were coming. And it was basically left to CWP as sitting ducks. We find out all of this information through investigations, through writings of authors, you know, who've actually delved really deep into this topic, and through the Truth and Reconciliation process, which is the first one to happen in the United States, patterned after the Truth and Reconciliation process that Archbishop Desmond Tutu did down in South Africa after the fall of apartheid, right? So, so we have a Truth and Reconciliation here in Greensboro, where the people involved, the people who lived in the neighborhood, Morningside Homes, and even I think, you know, one class, I think it may have been Virgil Griffin, I'm not sure, I can't remember, don't quote me on that, came to the participated in that process, and gave a speech about where he grew up and how he grew up and what he thought, and how he talked about how he, if I have the right person, he talked about how he loved history. This is all videotaped. They have videotaped all this stuff. But there still hasn't really been there's people within the city government today that have, apologized on behalf of the city and that sort of thing for what happened back then. But what I'm interested in, what I would be interested in is how, or what the people who were actually in city government back then, the mayor, Jim Melvin, and what his thoughts are, what the thoughts are of the people who were in management at the textile mills, the local textile mills, and their thought and how the textile mills, because all this, the CW was they were trying to establish unions or promote the establishment of unions in the textile mills, and people miss that whole thing when they get caught up in, it was a shootout and it was this and that. Well, it wasn't a shootout, it was a one-sided shooting, So they get caught up in that, but they missed it, that it was all about the establishment of unions. And had they been successful at establishing unions, would we still have textile mills here in North Carolina, or would they be over in Malaysia or Honduras or China somewhere like they are right now? If we had strong unionization, because what they were trying to do was bring together poor rural African-American people with poor rural white people. Something that textile management doesn't really want to see happen. So that story needs to be, that's the story that it's been told now, but in the beginning of all that, we really didn't know. And even the news record didn't really have a full grasp of it. It was the sensational. I don't even know if they realized it was sensational at that time. So I don't want to harp on them and say, they did it, because that's not, I would be that Monday morning quarterback. And it's easy to look back and say, this is the thing. But I did cover myself the truth and reconciliation process, part of that, and with a couple of our news writers that took place here in Greensboro. And people say that the coverage was kind of night and day between what the Peacemaker did and what the News and Record did. But I don't want you to look at it like that, as, they did this, because if you look at the video recordings of it, what we did and what the News and Record did, you put them together and you would get a much more full picture of what happened and what the conclusions were during that process. You shouldn't look at them as individual. This is individual here. You put it all together, because all of that, all that the News and Record did and all that we did would be in the videotapes. I knew, I was sitting there when Reverend Johnson said that he gets upset. The quote was something like, it makes his blood boil when he hears that, I can't get the quote right, I'm sorry. But the part of it was, it makes his blood boil. And I knew that the News and Record was going to run with that quote. So I didn't focus on the quote, because I thought that even though it would be nice in a story. The backstory behind why he felt the way he felt was because he had been vilified all these years. Because this happened. It's hard. It was, and I know it had to be hard for him, because those were his friends that were killed. And he wasn't trying to put his friends at risk or anything. He and the people that participated with the Communist Workers' Party, and even if you take away the word communist, just eliminate that. The whole goal of this whole thing was to establish worker protections. Now, I got a master's degree in environmental and occupational health, so I've seen what happens in mills and in textile mills, and how people, are exposed to, they develop brown lung and all kinds of things. So they're trying to establish some sort of workplace safety, workplace wage guarantee, that sort of thing in these mills. So it could have been called the Ringling Brothers Workers' Party. I don't care what to call it, but they had a purpose. But people, it's almost like even today, people, you say communists, and people in government go nuts, and they don't even really know what that is. You say socialist, they go nuts, but folks over in Norway and Holland and all this, you know, where people want to take cruise ships, you know, and go down rivers in Europe, you know, live and have a type of a socialist government, but they are provided with free healthcare and education and higher education. And see, we don't think about that. We kind of think about it, but they don't want you to think. They don't want you to get all caught up in the sensational, or what I consider to be the sensational.
No,
so that's why I'm saying you got to look deeper in this, and you got to put what we write and what they write on certain issues together, and maybe you get a fuller picture. Don't look at it. I would, you know, like anything. You don't want to look at just because somebody writes on biochemistry. You don't want to look at what they write in isolation. You want to take what somebody else did on a, you know, similar subject, and then you get a more fuller, richer perspective on what went on.
And I truly appreciate your expertise and perspective on this topic. I mean, this isn't about me, but you know, my grandparents and my extended family toiled in Franklin and Durham and Burlington Textile Processing Plant for generations. So you're preaching to the choir there, and just learning that new texture that's right here in Greensboro is intensely valuable. I don't want to take up your whole afternoon, but I just have a question or two more for you.
Oh, no worries,
you so much.
No worries, it's okay.
Yeah, but I so appreciate you telling us about that. And I'm just sort of lastly here, this is a little bit of like an open-ended thing, but I just am curious, if you, in a perfect world, right, if everything was great, what is the dream for the legacy of the peacemaker here in Guilford County for you?
Oh gosh, what is the legacy?
Your dream for the legacy.
Oh, my dream for the legacy. I hope that places like UNCG and places of higher learning continue to produce good journalists, good historians, who don't necessarily need to have to teach, or but want to be out there chronicling what goes on, be on that front line, and be the first person to chronicle what over time was considered as history, because we need more people, and we need more of a diverse bunch of journalists. Now it's blooming, and it's much better than what it has been, but the more voices you have at the table, the more stories get told. So people know, we hear about, the folks at the top. You always hear about like the president, like a Barack Obama, former president, or you hear about a Kamala Harris. So I want to know about the guy who's been driving the garbage truck for the city for the past 30 years. And what's that been like for him? I want to know about the young girl who is multilingual in public school and what it meant for her parents to make that journey from wherever they came from, whether it's the continent of Africa or Central South America or even Eastern Europe. I want to know what that's like, and I want to know what they're feeling, and how, if it was scary, or to tell that story. That's that's the intriguing part. So it's not always people like, oh yeah, I want to go interview this famous singer. Yeah, but what about the people who are the Little League baseball team that never gets in the daily paper or never gets in the Peacemaker? I always tell my reporters, I don't care about the college team, because they're going to be okay. I want to know about the junior high JV squad that's 3-7. I don't care what their record is. It's the heart, and it's the desire to do these things. And that's what makes people human. People think, oh, because you're on TV that you're, it's all, or you're doing something, it's all about success and success. Well, you got to have some failure in there. You got to have, there's always a struggle in everything if it's worth doing or worth having. So I guess my thoughts for the future of the paper is that, even though a lot of this is, I know that digital is one day going to be the thing. Right now, where it's it's a digital war going on, in the sense that we have to have some kind of regulations on digital, just like print media and broadcast media have regulations. I can't print certain things that you see online because there would be a libel suit to follow, you know, and that's okay, because that means that what they got online is not true and it's not vetted. But unfortunately, there are large swaths of our population who believe certain things are true and are valid because they're reading it from somebody's website who is neither a journalist, who has neither vetted anything, who wouldn't know how to vet anything, but they've got 1 million followers because whatever they're doing is so sensational and so outrageous and so, you know, whatever, that they get these followers, and they are poisoning the well. So we have to. So I want some good writers who like to tell the story, who like to tell other people's story. Good writers, some advertising on the way to pay the bills, and you know, some younger people who really have that interest and that passion, because entities like Facebook, Instagram, and all that, they're okay, but there's no accountability. And there should be accountability. They don't consider themselves as publications. They don't consider themselves as media, but they are, because they have a platform, just like I have a platform, which is the newspaper, and the website that's Carolina Peacemaker, that's a platform. And I am still responsible for what goes on that platform. And it can't be something that is not true. Because if it's not true, and if it hasn't been vetted, now if you want to give your opinion, or if I want to give my opinion, that's what an editorial page is for. It's not for just, you know, I'm going to spout this off and give you my opinion for 30 minutes. That's not what this is about. That's not what journalism is about. So, so we hope that it continues. I didn't think I was going to be doing this. Is not, but I'm having a nice time. I like the people that I work with. I like the community. I like the fact that I have roots in the community, and that I have sort of a street cred that's 55, 56 years old, that was established by, my predecessors. And it's just, it's nice, but it would, it's just, it has a purpose. I hope I have a purpose. So everybody needs a purpose. You need a reason to get up out of bed. So
yeah, well, I would say you certainly do. You absolutely do. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. Just lastly, I mean, you are the expert here, so I just wanted to ask you: is there anything that we didn't cover that you feel like you really want to tell, or is really important?
Oh, no, not off the top. But Phil, if there's something that comes up, y'all feel free to call me. I'm here. I'm around. I'll be glad to talk some more if you got a topic you want to talk about.
For sure.
I love history. I would love to just hang out at the history department over there.
Well, we'd be happy to have you.
I'm gonna get in there. Yeah, one of my favorite people there, her name is Dr. Colleen Krieger.
Ooh.
And she teaches, Dr. Krieger, she teaches,
I've heard good things.
African history. She teaches African history. So she doesn't really teach African American history, although she knows about it. She goes into the depths of what's on the continent and what has happened on the continent. And it's really, I'm fascinated with her, because how in the world do you cover 51, 52 countries, depending on who's at war with someone or what's going on? But she does textiles, the history of textiles and the history of rice and that sort of thing on the continent, and the development of it, and indigo and all that. I'm just,
yeah.
In addition to the political stuff, but it's just, I like all kinds of history. So yeah, I'm curious. I want to come over. Yeah. So
well, please get here. Yeah, come by. We'll grab a coffee. It'll be great.
Yeah.
It'll be lovely.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
You're quite welcome. Anytime.
Yeah, and we will definitely be in touch with a transcript for this, the next steps. But again, just I hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful week. Again, thank you for your time and your efforts. It was such a privilege to sit here and talk with you.
You're quite welcome. Anytime.
All right, beautiful. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
You too. Bye.